This is the reader's profile tag. I was tagged by Really Random Reads. Thank you so much for the tag. And these are 10 questions, I believe, that are kind of geared around books and preferences pertaining thereto and are kind of designed to outline my profile as a reader, if you will. So, without any further ado, let's get into the tag with question one. What for you makes a good book? A good book for me is a book that can make me think, a book that can make me feel, or the best kind of book, the kind that can do both. That is, that can affect me on both an emotional and an intellectual level. If a book can do any or all of that, it's a good book in my book. So that is what makes a good book for me. Question number two. What are you currently reading? I am currently reading this book right here, Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year. Um, I guess this is a classic book. I mean, it's certainly old enough. Daniel Defoe, obviously, being the author of Robinson Crusoe, which I actually have never read. In this book, it was kind of just a spur of the moment kind of buy. I saw it in a bookstore. It's a hardback book, but it was only $9.95, and it's a pretty dope looking little hardback, if I do say so. Pretty nifty cover. So I just kind of picked it up on a whim, and I have to say it is not the most riveting thing. It's kind of dry, but I do find it fascinating in a kind of morbid way. And oh yeah, this book hits particularly hard after living through the year of our Lord 2020. This book kind of uh, really does hit different after living through 2020. I'm sure I'll have plenty of to say about that in my review of it, but that is what I'm reading at present. Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year. Now, on to question three. What's the last book you didn't finish and why? That's a tough one because since I've been doing BookTube, I generally kind of make it a point to finish whatever it is I'm reading, no matter how grueling or miserable the experience may be. Because you got to have fodder for content, right? So I generally try to force myself to complete the books that I read, even if that the goal be just to rip them apart in the review. So I'm kind of drawing a blank when it comes to the last book that I DNF'd, but I think a prime candidate for that might be Zane Grey's Riders of the Purple Sage. I remember several years ago I picked that book up uh, in a bookstore and tried to read it and just found it like the most comically bad kind of pulp writing. And that's nothing against the pulps. There are a lot of good stories that were told in pulps and those kind of less than capital L literature books back in the old days. But that was not one of them. Riders of the Purple Sage was not one of them. I remember it was just boring, kind of floridly written as well. And it was so just kind of cliched and it was just kind of stupid. So I DNF'd that. So that may be the last book that I DNF'd, even though I'm not entirely sure. But I'll just answer with Riders of the Purple Sage by Zane Grey. Question number four. What obscure book do you wish other people would read? That's an easy one. That would be this book right here, The Tragedy of Man by Imre Madoc. I still don't know how to pronounce that name. It's Hungarian, if you didn't know. But this book right here was my number one read of last year, 2024. And it is pretty obscure because outside of its home country of Hungary, it does not seem to have much of an audience, and that is a crying shame because this book is just incredibly ambitious, and really, it's just uh, honestly one of the most ambitious things I've ever read. It's kind of in the same vein as Paradise Lost or Faust, but I think it can go toe to toe with either of those books. It is a sweeping kind of existential odyssey throughout human history, and it's kind of packaged in a very inventive framework. I think it is just really a masterpiece and a criminally underrated masterpiece. And I really do wish that more people would read this because I think it more than deserves it. So, yeah, the answer to that question, what obscure book do I wish more people would read? That would be The Tragedy of Man by Imre Madoc, or however you pronounce his name. Now, question 5. What's the longest book you've ever read? Um, that would probably be Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, if we're going to count that as one work, which it really is. And I think that was also the answer that Really Random Reads had for this question, the person who tagged me. So I'm going to use the same work here for my answer. Yeah, no contest. In Search of Lost Time is the longest thing I've ever read. Probably the longest thing I will ever read. It's somewhere between 4 and 5,000 pages, I believe, and I read it in about 8 months. So might have to toot my own horn a little bit for that, but yeah, definitely, without doubt, In Search of Lost Time is the longest thing I have ever read. Question number 6. If you could have a dinner party with 5 fictional characters, who would they be? So for me, it would be Frankenstein's monster, Alicia Western from Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger slash Stella Maris, Captain Ahab from Moby Dick, Edna Pontellier from Kate Chopin's The Awakening, and Batman, of course. You know, he's still my hero, damn it, after all these years. And, I feel as though such a question would be incomplete without me listing Batman in there. So, yeah, I'm going to round things out with Batman. So, those would be the 5 ideal fictional dinner party guests for me, I suppose. So, on to question 7. One book you could not put down. Okay, there are several books I could probably use for uh, the purposes of answering this question, but I think I'm going to use this book right here, and that would be Dean Koontz's Intensity. This is one of my favorite books, like literally one of my 10 favorite books. But it's also the book that I remember reading like the most intensely, pun intended there. Um, this book is, let's see, how many pages is this? 436 pages. And I think the last 200 of those I actually read in one sitting, in one night, thereabouts, I think. I remember staying up to like nearly midnight, just feverishly reading this book because it was that gripping. And I don't think there's been any other book that I've done that with, even though there are books that I could have done that with. This is really the only one that I really gave in and read that um, feverishly, I suppose. Dean Koontz's Intensity, stayed up late into the night, just plowing through this thing, turning those pages like a madman. So, yeah, I think that would be my answer to that question. Now, on to question 8. 5 books or authors you will never read. I don't really have an answer to this question. I tried to think of some books and authors that I would never see myself reading, but I'm kind of like, as they say never, right? I feel like the real meaning behind this question is books or authors that you have strong moral objections to, that you won't read on principle. And I don't really have that. I feel like you could. I feel like I'm kind of obligated here to say Neil Gaiman as of now, but no, that's not the case. I really don't have any um, works or authors that I just flat out refuse to read. There are a lot of things that I probably avoid for one reason or another, but like I'm not going to say that I'll never. Um, I'm not going to say that I'll never read any given book. Like I guess I could say Danielle Steele or something like that, and Sally Rooney. I don't foresee myself ever reading any of their stuff, but like I said, never say never. So there's not really any authors or books that I just object to strongly enough that I'm just going to say I'll never read it at all. There are a lot of works out there that I do object to, but I mean, not so strongly that I just outright refuse to even consider reading them. So I really don't have an answer to this question. So moving on to question number 9. 5 books you'd want if stranded on a desert island. Okay. So for me, the 5 books I would want if I was stranded on a desert island would be, of course, first and foremost, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, my favorite book of all time. Um, don't even know how many times I've read this. It is just kind of a perennially um, rereadable book to me. I could reread it right now, I'm sure, and just love it as much as I did, or nearly as much as I did the first time. I feel like this contains so much of humanity in it and the human experience that I could probably amuse myself for quite some time just reading this. And second would be uh, The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy. This was the most um, highly anticipated book of my life. I doubt there will ever be another book that I anxiously awaited um, like this one. But it fully satisfied me, even though it did not fully satisfy everybody. But I find it just a timeless masterpiece. I love this book so much, and much like Frankenstein, there's just so much of the human condition in this. It runs the gamut from um, kind of uh, nuclear tragedy and kind of familial guilt to philosophical musings to some kind of theoretical physics. There's just a lot in this, and it's all just, I mean, it's gorgeously written. The characters, I think, are the best Cormac McCarthy ever wrote. There's just so much that I love about this book. I really need to reread this, honestly. It's been a couple years. I really need to reread it. I'm sure I would love it just as much um, and find it just as engrossing as I did. But yeah, I would definitely take The Passenger if I was going to be on a desert island. And um, also, to pull out a book I've already used, Dean Koontz's Intensity. Yes, this is a kind of a mainstream thriller novel, but it's much more than that to me. Dean Koontz's Intensity is one of the finest written portrayals of that eternal battle between good and evil. It's a book which has inspired me quite literally. I love it. I've read this more than once, and I'm sure I could reread it again and have just as much of a good time with it as I did in the past. So I would take this to a desert island with me as well. And also, number 4, I guess, would be Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This book is something that I feel like you need to read uh, piecemeal, a little bit at a time. You gotta read this book like you eat the elephant, right? Just one bite at a time. It's dry, it's dull at times. Actually, much of the time, it is boring as hell. But there is so much in this book. There, much like Frankenstein and The Passenger, there is so much of humanity in this book, and so much that's conveyed in such a veiled and kind of subdued manner because there's some kind of very subversive things in this book. that if Melville had said outright at the time, he would likely have been ostracized for. This book is one that has big things on its mind, much bigger than just um, man versus whale. It is a book that is pretty much unquestionably, I think, the greatest book ever written by an American. But it's a book that, much like the sea upon which it takes place, has some very deep fathoms to it, and a lot of stuff to offer and a lot of things to unpack. So I would definitely take Moby Dick to a desert island with me. And finally, number five, I actually have not read this book yet. Uh, but I'm going to include it anyway because I feel like it would definitely satisfy for desert island reading, and that is going to be the collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. Like I said, I haven't read this book yet. I have read one story, I think, out of this. I remember reading The Garden of Forking Paths in college and just adoring that short story. So if all the other stories in this are anything like that, or of the same caliber as that, then damn straight I would take this with me to a desert island in a heartbeat. So that's going to be my number five pick, the as of yet unread collected fictions of Jorge Luis Borges. And question 10. If you were to write a book, what would it be about? Well, I have written a book actually, and it is called The Unbearable Heaviness of Being, or Life Reviled. It is currently unavailable. I pulled it from sale for some personal reasons, mainly just because I read back through this well after the time that I published it initially. I read back through it and I was like, damn, you might have went a little bit too far, old boy, perhaps. I think I may have gone a little bit beyond the pale with things in this book. But this is a book that I have written. It is, the title perhaps might indicate it is about antinatalism and the varied miseries of life packaged into a fictional framework. It is, I guess you would say, a philosophical novel. And even though, like I said, I have at present kind of withdrawn it from the market, I am still damn proud of this thing. Um, I'm not trying to go on like an ego trip or anything, but I think that for a self-published book, because self-publishing doesn't necessarily have the highest reputation. I think that for a self-published book, this is a pretty respectable product. Again, reading back over it as I did and being kind of aghast at some of the things that I said in here, I didn't really notice any mistakes. Honestly, I think I proofread it well enough, and honestly, I think the sentences read pretty good. Not saying that I'm on the level of Herman Melville or Cormac McCarthy, but I do think that this reads fairly well, fairly eloquently. Um, so you bet your ass I'm still proud of this, even though it is not at present available for purchase. This is a book that I have read, The Unbearable Heaviness of Being. It. I read back over this, like I said, and I was kind of, I kind of felt like that Steve Buscemi character from the Spy Kids film. Do you think God stays in heaven because he's afraid of what he's created here on Earth? Yeah, so if that stokes your imagination or kind of fires your curiosity, this book goes places. It goes really beyond the pale, honestly. In fact, I will say this: I may possibly be the first person who wrote a okay, maybe not the first, but maybe on the ground floor anyway of anti-natalist fiction. So I do take a certain measure of pride in that. But yeah, this is the book that I read, and it is The Unbearable Heaviness of Being, or Life Reviled. Yeah, so that is the answer to that question. And now tag some people. So I'm going to tag Britain at some Okie dude. I'm going to tag Jason at Jason Furman. And I'm going to tag Rich Lighter at the Naked Booktuber. Yes, and anybody else who wants to do this, feel free. Just jump on, have at it. Good questions here, interesting um, answers you could probably give here. So yeah, have at it if you want. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.